I said, well, I guess that takes care of that. I'm not going to be letting the dog off the leash anymore.
Really?
But the main reason I have to keep him on the leash is he does not understand cars and trucks at all. And if I didn't walk him on a leash, he'd be dead right now.
Okay.
So, that's okay. I'm retired. I can walk him. Gets me out of the house.
Good morning, sir. Oh, you could come over here and harass me. I didn't even see you in the parking lot. Lesson learned on my part.
Good morning. Glad everyone is here this morning. Yeah, he picked on me last week. In the parking lot even. No, in the parking lot. Glad everyone's here this morning. If you weren't here last week, you missed a great class. It wasn't me. It was Jerome from Emmaus House. It was fantastic. If you haven't seen it online, I highly recommend it. If you don't know anything about it, I'm not going to do his whole thing because there's no way I can even touch on it. But it fills the gap between the Haitian Children's Home to when kids have to leave it because of their age to getting them out into the world, to be productive citizens. And what they do at Emmaus House, it's just phenomenal. You would think that more countries in that would do that, because once you're out of the children's home, what are they going to do? They're going to have any education. But it's not just focusing on education in the world. It's also about their spiritualness and their attitude and their physical health and all that. It was phenomenal what Jerome did. So if you haven't seen it, please go online and see it. I know it's on, I believe it's YouTube. It was phenomenal, just sitting here listening to Jerome talk about it and the slides that he has. It's great what they're doing for those kids. It gives us hope for kids that are leaving the children's home, that they're just not, booted out into the street, go survive by yourself. It really gives those kids a chance to make something for themselves, but it really also focuses on the spiritualness and the relationship with God as well. It was phenomenal to hear him. So please, if you get a chance. Okay. If you didn't hear that, the link should be posted on Facebook as well for that. It was great to hear Jerome and what they're doing. I heard a lot about it. I know Tom and other people have really been involved, but then just hearing Jerome and some of the detail he went into it and how one of the churches got started over there, it was just amazing. It gives you hope. It gives you hope in certain areas.
I also recorded it in case somebody would like it. I could give them a recording.
There's another option for it. So didn't want to take too much time, but it's well worth the view once, twice, three times, whatever. It's really worth it. It was a great class to hear Jerome and the work that they're doing there. But now you're stuck with me, so that's your problem. We are back in Nahum. We're at chapter 1 and verse 9. I'm going to be going through that, and it's talking about what's going to happen to the Assyrians. The chapter 1 is basically what God's going to do to them, and we talked a little bit about, we know that God is slow to anger, we know his power is great, and that all of the elements and the things in the world, both living and non, they actually are in submission to God, and they're all at his mercy. And God can do whatever he wants, and things will listen to him. I'd like to read starting with verse 9 down to verse 13, unless anybody has any questions from 2 weeks ago. I hope not, because I can't remember 2 weeks ago. So, Nahum chapter 1, verses 9 through 13. Whatever you devise against the Lord, he will make a complete end of it. Distress will not rise up twice. Like tangled thorns and like those who are drunken with their drink, they are consumed. From you has gone out one who plotted evil against the Lord, a wicked counselor. This is what the Lord says. Though they are at full strength, and so they are many, so also they will be cut off and pass away. Though I have afflicted you, I will afflict you no longer. So now I break his yoke from upon you, and will tear your shackles to pieces. With what's going to happen to the Assyrians, and I keep going back and forth, the Assyrians and the Ninevites. Nineveh is the capital of the country over there, and they're all Assyrians. So if you hear me going back and forth, I'm not talking about two different people. I'm still talking about the same group of people. The affliction the destruction is going to be coming to the Assyrians. And then later on in here, we're talking about the yokes being broken. We're going to be hearing what's going to be happening to the Israelites, to Judea. As I mentioned a couple weeks ago, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Something bad's going to happen to somebody, chances are something's good's going to be happening to somebody else. And that's what we're going to see later on in this chapter when we hear his yoke is going to be broke from upon you. We're hearing something good going to be happening to somebody else. But going back to verse 9, I just wanted to bring that in, to two people that we're going to be talking about. And all along when we went through Jonah, it was all about the Ninevites. How come the Ninevites were given a second chance, and what are the Ninevites to the Israelites? We know that they're the thorn in their sides. And this is just a continuation of all of that. People, countries, groups of people can get this attitude that we are so strong that we're invincible. It could be a nation that way. It could be one individual that way. It could be two or three people that get that way, that, we're so strong we can go around and bully people. We can get what we want. And that's how Assyria was. They were a strong country. They were a strong people. And they were going around bullying people. They were getting their way. And now they're having to pay for that. They had their chance. They did repent, that we saw in the book of Jonah. They had their chance. They did repent. They turned and did what God said, but they fell back into their old ways. They fell back into the ways of bullying people, persecuting people, being evil. They reverted back to what they were, and God's done with them. He's done with their second chance. But God also used those Assyrians to prove his point, to teach his people, the Israelites, their lesson. He was punishing them through the deeds of the Assyrians. Okay? Make sense? Because I know I've gone through a couple different paths, weave like that, and that's how my thoughts go sometimes. So, but, question, or are you just doing glasses? Okay. Good things are going to be coming to the Israelites because of the destruction that's going to be happening to the Assyrians. And that's now what we're seeing is what Nahum's talking about is going to be happening to the Assyrians, that he's going to make a complete end of it. Not just an end, a complete end. And then at the end of verse 9, distress will not rise up twice. How many times do we see in the news that, so-and-so was arrested, he's in jail, he's back out, a couple months later he's back in jail. Somebody keeps repeating the same crime again. There's never an end to it. It always keeps happening. But this we're hearing, distress will not rise up twice. And this is coming from Nahum, who's getting his information from God. So if it's not going to happen twice, you can be assured this is not going to rise up. The Assyrians will not rise up again against God's people. So that God's people can have confidence that when this destruction happens to the Assyrians, that they're not going to come back and be a thorn in their side again. And then we go on to verse 10, it says, and those who are like drunken with their drink, they are consumed. I don't know if you've ever seen or been around anybody that's drunk. Unfortunately, I have. They have no wits about them. But this ain't talking about somebody actually being drunk with alcohol. It's about somebody being so engulfed in their actions. It's about somebody being either good or bad, but in this case, being so bad, so wicked, so evil, they can't see what is right. They're so enthralled in it, what they're doing, that they're saying, this is okay. I see nothing wrong with this. They're not paying attention to anything else that's going on. They're just so engulfed with what they're doing. They're drunk with their sin. They're drunk with their evil. And that's what we're talking about here. They're so consumed with what they're doing, they don't see anything else. They don't see what they're doing is wrong. They don't see what they're doing is hurting people. That's how the Assyrian people were. They had turned so evil, they don't realize what they're doing. They're just drunk with their evilness. And we can see, today in various things with various people, when they get that way, how bad it could be and how there's no hope. But we know there's always hope. There's always hope until God says there's no hope. For the Assyrians right now, there's no hope because God is going to put the destruction on them. And they're living in such a sin that they don't know what they're doing, and they don't even have a chance to turn from the sin to make things right, where they can save themselves again, where they can turn to God and give a chance that God would forgive them for what they're doing. That's how evil these people are. Yes, Tom?
I was just thinking, you hear that saying, might makes right?
Yes.
And maybe that's kind of where they're at. Like you said, they're so powerful, and they can go about and do whatever they want, so there's nobody really checking them, and they're not checking themselves. They're assuming that since they're continuing to be successful in their pursuit of other nations, that all must be well. And yet, as you said, the mountain of evidence is building up against them is that it isn't. And they sort of had a mission, I guess, if you think back to Isaiah or whatever. Now they've exceeded that, and so God has basically said, like they'll say, the time for repentance is done. Now judgment is coming.
Absolutely. Did everybody hear Tom's comments? I mean, that's a point on with these folks. They had to be doing their evil for a reason, and they were getting their own pleasure out of it, and they're just so enthralled with it, they're not realizing what's going on, and it's a sad state, and it can happen to anybody at any time. I mean, it can happen to us as a congregation. We can be doing something, and we can turn so far from the truth. It can happen to us as an individual. So we always need to keep in check. How do we keep in check? Read the Bible. Stay true to God. Surround ourselves with good people. They always say one bad apple can spoil a good bunch. I never really knew what that meant until there was this one tomato in with a group of other tomatoes. You got one bad one. It'll be good till tomorrow. Well, tomorrow, there's 3 bad tomatoes. It makes sense. If we have that one bad influence in our life, can we resist it? Or we say, well, I want to be the good influence in their life. Hopefully that's the case. But we always got to be cautious about that one bad group. The Assyrians, the Israelites were in a different position. We've got to be careful about that one bad influence in our life, that we make sure that we're surrounded by enough people that we can resist the temptation of the devil, because we know what his goal is for us. His goal is the destruction of us. Wandered off a little bit there. Continuing on after verse 10 to verse 11, it's talking about the one who plotted evil against the Lord. And it's just not talking about one person that's plotting evil against God. It's about the nation that is really speaking out that they have no respect for God. They don't believe in him. They don't trust him. They don't love him. They don't worship him. It's as a nation they're speaking out against God, and they're speaking evil against him because they're not doing what he says. It's, we've read it many times in the Bible. If you're not for me, you're against me. And that is so true. You can't be serving two different masters, as we hear. You're doing this or you're doing that. You can't do the middle of the road. It's hard to do, and you're not being faithful to one or the other. You're playing both sides of the fence, and if you're not faithful to God by favoring somebody else, you will have the destruction coming upon you. Any questions so far? Verse 12, he goes on, and Nahum's talking about, though they are at full strength, and so they are many, they will also be cut off and pass away. I like using a sports analogy when I read this. You always want to play the best. You always want to beat the best. So nobody can say, well, when you played so-and-so, he was number 3, he wasn't number 1. Well, when you played that basketball team, their star was out sitting on the bench. He wasn't really there at full strength. So you really didn't beat the best. Assyrian was known through the countryside as being a strong force, a powerful nation. They had a strong army. They were a force to be reckoned with. And here they're saying, Nahum's saying, though they are at full strength and though they are many. It just wasn't a small army. It just wasn't a small group of people. These were some of the best fighters, and it was a large military. And then he goes on to say, so they will be cut off and pass away. Not only is God going to destroy the Assyrians with this strong army, this strong group of people, they're going to be cut off and pass away. So this isn't just going to send a message to God's people saying, look, I've punished you for so long. I've had the Assyrians being the thorn in your side. I've had them, over you all this time. I'm going to take them away. God's people should be thrilled with it, and I'm sure they are. We'll read about that. But the nations throughout and around are going to see what's happening to the Assyrians. They're going to see God's power. So this instance that's going to happen is not just for God's people to see. All nations are going to see this. All nations are going to see God's power that he's going to be putting on the destruction of the Assyrians. So this is going to have ripple effects through other countries. As we see today in various things that happen, and we as a country can sit back and watch, well, there's a battle going over here and over here. It may not affect us directly, but we can see what's happening and we can see the results, and we're going to pay close attention to it. And as God works in our lives, and God works in other countries, and God works in other people, we can see the ripple effect, and that happens. How do you feel when we hit a new brother or sister that's baptized? How do you feel when they pop out of the water? I get chills. I get goosebumps. I'm sorry. It's just such a good feeling seeing that. It's a little ripple effect. Somebody recognized and put God on in baptism. The ripple effect it has in us. That you want to go out and teach other people so badly at that point. But in turn, when there's somebody that's doing so much evil, what kind of effect does that have on you? Does it make you angry, frustrated? There's going to be a ripple effect of the destruction of the Assyrian people. And it's going to go through nations throughout. So it could be a positive effect for most, but it could also have a negative effect. Like, well, we were kind of hooked up with these Assyrians, and now, what's going to happen? But the Assyrians are going to be wiped out, and they're going to be wiped out completely. And people are going to see God's power in what's going to happen. In verse 13, Nahum talks about, and I will break your yoke from upon you and tear your shackles to pieces. He's talking about bondage here, the bondage that God's people were in, the yoke, the burden that was been put on them. We all know what a yoke is. It's the yoke, the thing that goes around an ox or a cow for them to pull the plow and whatnot. It's labor. It's hard work. Shackles. We think of people in prison with shackles on them. And they're tied up. They're restricted what they can do. And that's what happened to God's people when the Assyrians were over and when the Assyrians were taking control. God's people were under their rule. They were locked up, limited to what they could do. God's going to break this from them. He's going to set them free. He's going to take that yoke, the pressure of the Assyrians off them. He's going to take that thorn out of their side. It's going to be great for them to be free again. And they'll be able to go back and do what they used to do. Worship God the way they did. The punishment is over for God's people. And that's what is hinting here in verse 13, that the yoke is going to be taken from them and their shackles are going to be taken into pieces. Any questions so far? Clear as mud. Yes?
My question, I guess, is from the time that they were in power to the time that they were wiped off the face of the earth, you know the time frame?
What I found was between about 100 and 150 years. I don't know how accurate that is. Did you hear that question, Ted? The time from...
I heard the question. I don't know the answer.
I saw one commentary said 100 years, another said 200, and several of them said about 150 years. I saw more at about 150 years. Terry?
Syria was a power for a couple of centuries.
Yes.
But they didn't always be messing with Israel or Judah. In a prior century, they had taken away the northern kingdom of Israel. That had happened in the past, before Nahum. My little preface here to the book says that Assyria fell in 612 BC. These are well-established dates.
Okay.
And they're thinking that the book here of Nathan was written maybe around 620, which would have been a very short time before Assyria fell, I should say. And if that's true, even if it's more than 8 years or so, if it was 28 years or 38 years, this was still a fairly short historical time from the time that Nathan wrote this to the time that it actually came to pass.
Right. What was your original question?
I just wonder what the time frame was as far as like when they were at their most powerful to the time that they...
I took that as from when they repented in Jonah over. That was the 150 so years. From at their most powerful...
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood the question there. well, as Terry said, they were in power for a long time at that point. So throughout, they were at their power. But from the time of when they repented in Jonah to the time of Nahum was roughly 100, 150 years.
And you got 612 is when they were killed. I mean, wiped off the earth. This really happened. Everything is prophesied here in Nahum happened at a time in history of 612 BC. Okay, in the 700s BC was when Assyria became not just powerful but very ruthless. They were mean people, and when they occupied, they would kill, they would force people out of their homes to other parts of the world, like they did Israel. And they were just known to be just plain ruthless. There was no kindness, there was no understanding or accommodation. They just came in with great power in the 700s, anytime they felt like to any of the countries around them, and just stomped them.
Well, that's when they were using their power, flexing their muscles.
Yeah, but at Nathan's time, we're getting to the end of that period, and Nathan is saying, here's where God's judgment is finally going to come on you, and it's going to come on you, and you are going to cease to exist, and that's what happened in 612 BC.
So the nations around realized it wasn't such a... I'm sorry, Ted. Yes? No, go ahead.
I want to approach this from a whole different standpoint, because this actually is very important from several different angles. There's a book out by a guy named Kenneth Bearfield. Remember the book if you're interested in this. It's called The Prophet Motive. And he goes through 10 or more of these nations that the prophets, the Old Testament prophets, prophesied against. I can't remember if Assyria is in that book or not, but I remember Tyre, Babylon, Egypt, some other ones that not come to my mind right now. And he shows when these guys were in power, where they were at their height, when it was that God had his prophets prophesy against their, so that they would be, going to go down and whatever. And the very specific things he says from each prophet as to what was going to happen. And each one of those prophecies, it's interesting when you study it this way, tells something that would not, people wouldn't think that would happen to that nation. Okay? Tyre was a financial, it was like Switzerland. I mean, it was like Geneva. There's no way in the world it would be brought to a fishing town like it is today. Egypt was like the biggest empire of the entire world. How could that empire ever fall? And yet, the things that they were most known for, their fisheries and their textiles and all that kind of stuff. Look at Egypt today. It's not the same way. And he tells when each one of those things started to happen in how many years. It happens within sometimes 50 or 100 years. Sometimes it happens over the course of 1,000 years. But every one of those prophecies came true. And that's true here of Nate, what he's talking about in this book also. And it's something that I don't think we talk about enough. These prophecies show that there's somebody wrote this book that knew what was going to happen in the future. It was impossible. If you like that stuff, get that book. It's called The Prophet Motive. Absolutely interesting, very easy read.
It would be interesting to read, if the Assyrians are in there of how much power they had and when it was to the fall of that. Because the nations around, whether it's the Assyrians, the Egyptians, or, some of the other ones that Ted listed, the nations around see the power that they had, and all of a sudden they crumble down to nothing, to countries that are now at the feet of everybody else.
I'm thinking in the future of possibly using that book and doing a class on that. Because I think it's more important than we made it back.
Well, it's important to see the power that nations had and that other people saw and recognized and felt the power, whether it was the destruction or the evilness that was put onto them, and seeing that the destruction of them wouldn't have been of their own demise. God's had a hand in this. And that would be the very interesting thing to see about that.
And it was always at a time when it didn't seem like those prophecies could possibly ever come true.
When they were at the height of their power.
When they were being prophesied about.
Okay? That goes back to, if you want to beat somebody, you want to beat them at their best so nobody can say anything. But these people were taken down at their ultimate power. And as Ted was saying, that nobody could imagine that could happen. Unfortunately, we can see that in nations around the world today, whether it's part of our own nation or others, that what power that they did have and where they're at now. We're seeing some of these things happening today. It's unfortunate, but it happens to countries that they bring it on themselves.
This is why God wrote the Bible in real time and space. You look at all the other religious books in the world, and they don't do that. It's verifiable.
Through evidence.
Stuff actually happened.
So that's the only book that does that from that distance. Profit Motive, if anybody wants that book. We're not plugging that book today, but there it is. But we are. Ted is. Any questions before we continue on to the rest of the chapter? Great comments, thank you. So the fall is going to happen to this powerful nation. And as the question was brought up, how long did it happen? It was long enough that people recognized how powerful that they were, and that they're probably at the height of their power at this point. Verses 14 and 15 to wrap up the chapter. Excuse me. The Lord has issued a command concerning you. Your name will no longer be perpetrated. I will eliminate the carved images and the cast metal image from the house of your gods. I will prepare your grave, for you are contemptible. Behold on the mountains the feet of him who brings good news, who announces peace. Celebrate your feast, Judah. Pay your vows, for never again will the wicked one pass through you. He is eliminated completely. We're seeing total and utter destruction coming. I mean, verse 14 is should be very concerning for the Assyrians. I mean, their no long will be perpetrated. Their name is going to be eliminated, wiped off. Nobody's going to think of Assyria anymore. Nobody's going to think of, when they hear destruction or evilness, they're not going to be thinking of the Assyrians anymore, because they're going to be eliminated. And since they were an evil people, they were not following God. Of course, their gods were graven images and idols and like that. They're going to be wiped out and eliminated. Everything about the Assyrians are going to be gone. And why? At the end of verse 14, they were contemptible. And there's nothing the Assyrians can do to save themselves. They have gone so far from God, they have turned their back on him, and they've walked away from him so far, there is nothing they can do to save themselves. They have no regard for God whatsoever. And they're not going to be known as a great nation anymore. They're not going to be known as a nation anymore. They're going to have a complete fall, a complete and utter destruction. God's going to destroy all their images. They are doomed for a complete, total destruction. Basically eliminated from the earth. Nobody's going to think about the Assyrians anymore. Terry.
There's a lot of cities that have been around for a very, very long time. Jericho, for example, was a city long, long before Israel ever came along, and that was like 4,000 or 3,000 years ago, okay? But Nineveh, where is Nineveh today? You know, we're saying over and over that it's going to be obliterated. The city today no longer exists.
Correct.
In, I think it's Iraq, is a town called Mosul. And opposite, across the river from that city today are the ruins of Nineveh. And the ruins of Nineveh have not been lived in for way over 2,000 years. The city was obliterated and continues to be uninhabited. So it's not like you can go to Jericho, which is still a town nearby where Jericho was originally in the time of, the Old Testament,
A town that's still being lived in.
Yeah, Rome is still there. It's been there for, 3,000 years. But there's a lot of these towns like Nineveh that the Bible said would be forever desolate. And it has been desolate now for thousands of years.
Uninhabitable, unlived in.
Uninhabitable.
Well, that would be, coming true, the total and utter destruction that's predicted of what's going to happen to them. And when God says it's going to happen and it happens, There's no coming back from it. There's nothing anybody can do to make it change from what God wants it to what God did to it. This destruction that we're reading about, through the chapter 1, coming into the last verse here in 15. Now we're hearing some good news. Who announces peace? Celebrate your feast, Judah. Being under the control and under the power of the Assyrians, Judah couldn't celebrate the feasts that they once did. Now they're able to go back and celebrate those feasts. And that's what they're being told to do once this destruction happens to Assyria. You can go back and celebrate the feasts that you once did to worship God. This is all going to be coming the good news for Judah, the good news for God's people. Because, he continues on in verse 15, for never again will the wicked one pass through you. They might be punished again for something else that they do, but it's not going to be the Assyrians. They will not be one to punish you again if God chooses, because God is wiping them out. He is eliminating them completely. One can say, how can God be taking care of his own people if he's punishing the Israelites? He's punishing them through the people of the Assyrians. He's teaching them a lesson, just like we're taught lessons through various things. But when God teaches his lesson, we grow from it, and he helps us grow from it. God's removing these Assyrians. His people have learned their lesson. And now they can go back to continue to worship God the way that they should be worshiping God. They've learned their lesson of what they were doing wrong. And God is removing this thorn in their side. He's removing this power. He's removing these people that had control over God's people of Judah. And now they're able to go back to the feast that they once did and have the knowledge and trust by God saying they will never come at you again, that is going to happen. Because God keeps his word, and we know that, and he's proven it to his people so many times. The Israelites, he's proven it so many times. You do this, I do this. Well, they go part way. Well, God teaches them a lesson. They do what they're supposed to, God shows them. They fall away from God, he gets them back in line. God keeps his word, and what God has said to them, what God says to us, is truth, and he's going to do what he says. And he's going to have the destruction of the Assyrians, and they're no longer going to be a thorn in the side of God's people anymore. Any questions before we continue on chapter 2? Quiet group today. Chapter 1 was basically what God will do to them. And now we're going to see in chapter 2 kind of like how God's going to do it to the Assyrians. Verses 1 and 2. The one who scatters will come against you. Keep watch over the fortress. Watch the road, bind up your waist, summon your strength. He's telling the people of Assyria what they need to be doing. There's going to be a big battle coming here. For the Lord will restore the splendor of Jacob like the splendor of Israel, even though destroyers have laid waste to them and ruined their lives. Nahum speaking of a vision he saw back in chapter 1. Now he's seeing a mighty army coming against the city of Nineveh. What's going to come to destroy a large army, a large city that's fortress, a large city that's got strength? If the Assyrians are a strong army that can go out and destroy people, they're fortified in their home base. They're well protected. So how is God's army? How is the people of God? How is God going to destroy these people? Is he going to bring in an army? Is he going to bring down thunder and lightning? What is God going to do to destroy these people? Hopefully we'll see part of that as we go through the rest of these verses. At the end of in verse 2, we see that he will restore the excellence of Jacob. What do we think he means there? The excellence of Jacob. Who's Jacob? Israel. He's going to restore them back to what they were. He's going to restore them to the ways that they were when they were following God the way they should be. Verse 2, I think I read all of verse 2. Even though the destroyers laid waste to them and ruined their vines. the Assyrians ruined everything that Israel had. And it kind of referring back to their vines, if there's vineyards in that. If you're somebody that grows grapes and whatnot, and somebody destroys your vines, they've taken your income. They've taken away that you can provide for things. They brought you to your knees. And that's kind of what he's referring to. These people have brought you to your knees, but you are going to be restored. You are going to be made complete. You are going to be made whole. And now the people that did that to you, they're going to face their destruction. You thought it was all doom and gloom, and you thought it was going to be this way for a long time. It's ending. And they're going to see how God's going to end it. So they know that the end is coming to the pain and turmoil that they've been going through for all these years. So there's hope for God's people, and they can see the hope coming with the message that Nahum's given here, and they're going to see how it's going to happen, but they know that there is an end to the yoke going to be taken off of them, and the shackles going to be freed from them, that they can go back and worship God the way they should be doing. Verses 3 through 7 talk about a battle here. The shields of his warriors are dyed red. This is going to be who's coming up against the Assyrians. The warriors are dressed in scarlet. The chariots are fitted with flashing steel when he is prepared to march. And the cypress spears are brandished. The chariots drive wildly in the streets. They rush around in public squares. Their appearance is like torches. They drive back and forth like lightning flashes. He remembers his officers. Verses 4 and 5 are kind of referring to the Assyrians here. They stumble in their advance. They hurry to her wall, and the mantlet, which is like a cloak or a cape for protection, is set up. The gates and the rivers are open, and the palace sways back and forth. It is set. She is stripped. She is led away. Her slave women are sobbing like the sound of doves beating their breasts. An image is painted here of an invading army, which is going to come over to capture the city of Nineveh. And in verses 3 and 4, we see the color red. The shields are red. The soldiers are dressed in red. It could be an intimidating sight. You can see all these warriors coming at you. If they're dressed in their clean garb, their shields are bright and shiny, no damage to them, would you get the impression that they're mighty warriors? Now you got this warrior coming in. He's got a shiny shiny sword and whatnot, but his clothes and that are red. He's red. What's red for a warrior? Color of blood. This is a hard-fought battle man. When you have a child and he cuts himself and you need to get a cloth, what's the best color cloth to grab? I heard white. Red. I don't have kids and I know this. It's red for the simple fact, when you got a little kid that's bleeding, I need to come back to the microphone, sorry. When you got a little kid that's bleeding and you grab a white cloth and put it there, all of a sudden you see all this red coming out. It's going to put the kid in a panic. You have a red cloth and you put it there, it's not going to be that obvious that he's bleeding that bad and you're panicking. Red is the best color for something like that. If you're a warrior and you want to intimidate somebody, you want the sword that's got, kind of shiny, but you want a little bit of blood on it. You want to be covered in a little bit of blood. Hey, I just fought a hard battle, and look at the blood of all the people that I just killed. The color red is significant to help intimidate, to let them know there is going to be a hard-fought battle coming your way. So it's interesting that it was put that way in what Nathan's saying, that these warriors would be in red like that. So it sets a scene in the defenders' minds, the Assyrians' mind, of what's coming their way. Their mind is going to be made up, whether it's true or not, what's going to happen, but their mind is set up. Impression. What you see, that impression is going to sit in their mind and it's going to maybe change how they react and how they defend and how they do certain things. So their mind is starting to be made up by, wow, look at these warriors with blood-soaked clothes. They've hard-fought battles, and they're still here. They're victorious. But now they're coming after us. And then he goes on to talk about how they're defending the city. Remember, these should be elite warriors, strong warriors, people that have taken other countries. And now they're running around their own city They're driving around wildly. They're stumbling around. It's like they don't know what they're doing. They're confused. They're not sure how to defend the city because of the chaos that's going on. Why would that be? Why would they be confused when they're being attacked? Because they're being attacked. This isn't something that's happened to them before. They've been the one attacking. They've been the one in control. They haven't been on the defense before. Now they're defending. They're at the height of their power. There are many, many warriors, many, many people in this city. And now they're being attacked. So of course it could cause chaos. I'm sure they haven't prepared for, how do we defend our city? Well, just put a few guards along the wall, we'll be fine, because nobody's going to attack us. Why would anybody dare attack us? Look how strong we are. That's not what they were set for. They weren't prepared to have to defend themselves like this. We're going to stop here for now. It's time to anyhow, before I get into something else. Any questions before we close for today? See you all next week. Thank you.